There are certain actors out there who spend years, maybe even decades, dedicating their lives to one show and one character. And as much as they love this show and the person they're portraying, that doesn't always mean that it's plain sailing. When you're not in control of the writing and the direction, sometimes you might end up hating what they're doing to you. I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 10 TV actors who hated their storylines. 10. Blake Lively hated Serena's morals. Gossip Girl. From what we can tell as a public who don't know her personally, Blake Lively seems like a dream, like a really genuinely lovely person. Considering this, you couldn't get a more mismatched character for her to play than high-flying, morally twisted it-girl Serena van der Woodsen on Gossip Girl. It was only several years after the finale of her fame-making show that Lively spoke out about her disdain for her character's actions. In particular, she felt uncomfortable portraying a character so nonchalant and at times proud of doing horrible things. People loved it, she explained, but it always felt a little personally compromising. You want to put a better message out there. Increasingly dramatic and horrific storylines were coming her way, seeing her character cause someone to overdose, sleep with someone's boyfriend, even shoot a guy. She explained that she came to resent her on-screen self because of what she was promoting to an audience largely made of teen girls who were looking up to her as a role model. Her desire to be a good person was at odds with her character's dramatic storylines, and with such a young, impressionable audience, it's no wonder she felt that it weighed on her conscience. 9. Jason Segel thought Marshall was boring. How I Met Your Mother. Staying on any one TV show for too long can become draining, I'd imagine. You definitely become more susceptible to burnout. However, for the most part, that's because you know your character so well that you just want a new challenge, not because actually the whole thing has become incredibly boring, yourself included. Whilst also admitting that it was the stupidest, most banal problem to have in the world, Jason Segel complained in a GQ interview of how his character in the hit sitcom How I Met Your Mother became literally the most boring person possible. He reflected on the latter seasons of the show, explaining that his character was excluded from any interesting storylines that would have offered him any development. Marshall became a predictable 2D character, and Segel felt trapped in those stagnant waters. His reluctance to commit to the final season was born of his discontent with Marshall's direction, and it almost led to the show being cancelled early. For the sake of the cash and for finishing what he started, he decided to stick it out a bit longer, but that hasn't stopped him from making jabs at the show's disappointing writing ever since. 8. Jonathan Banks hated how they did things with KAYLEE, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Across products within the Breaking Bad universe, there have been a few times where Banks expressed his disagreement with the depiction of his relationship with granddaughter KAYLEE. It seems that these wrong decisions were made for the sake of the storyline running, but weren't necessarily the best for the character. In the more recent show, Better Call Saul, there's one instance where Mike yells at KAYLEE in a seemingly out-of-character turn. It's one of those scenes where Peter and I disagree a little bit, but there's a lot of things I do that maybe I wouldn't have done, Banks admitted. Or rather, if I were directing it, it wouldn't have been my choice. Back in the days of Breaking Bad, this little issue was equally as prescient. Banks is alleged to have strongly opposed the decision to have Mike abandon KAYLEE when the DEA sets their sights on him, seeing that it made no sense for him to do so because he loved her so much and did so much for her, only to leave her with her last memory of him being a traumatic abandonment. He's definitely not one to keep his gripes to himself, as he claims that he'll just say so if he doesn't like something, but in the world of TV, even Banks can't always get his way. 7. Idris Elba hated Stringer Bell's death. The Wire. It was unfortunate for fan-favourite actor Idris Elba that his character was always destined to bite the dust. Playing Stringer Bell in HBO's acclaimed series The Wire, Elba managed to gain quite a crowd of fans. His expert performance lent the character a nuance and depth that few predicted, even prompting the show's team to admit that they hadn't foreseen such a positive audience response. What he didn't know though, as he built up his reputation on the show, was that Stringer Bell was never going to see things through to the end. In Season 3's penultimate episode, Bell's time to go arrived. On reading the script, Elba admitted that he was shocked and hugely disappointed. With such giant audience support, he'd predicted a far longer run, but showrunner David Simon later came out to say that regardless of any audience reaction, Bell's death was set in stone. They had confirmed 2 years prior that this is what was going to happen, and that nothing was going to change that. On a personal level, Elba hated that this pre-confirmed storyline meant the end for his Wire run. However, he did at least admit that thematically it was appropriate to the narrative. 6. Lena Headey thought Cersei deserved more. Game of Thrones. It's definitely no secret that a number of cast members left feeling unsatisfied with the ending of Game of Thrones, and one star who's always tried to approach the issue with grace is Cersei actress Lena Headey. Headey always claimed a close connection to her character, being able to think as Cersei would. and in season 8 this was put to the test big time as the finale approached, and Heidi was made to take the character in a direction she didn't necessarily agree with. Aside from the character's death, which we'll get to, she felt that in the final season some of Cersei's agency and determination were chipped away. A big example of this is Cersei's tryst with Euron. Having sworn she would never sleep with him, she goes back on this and does it anyway, and Heidi was not impressed. "I kept saying she wouldn't, that she would keep fighting," explained Heidi. But the showrunners obviously know what they're doing and were adamant that Cersei would do what she had to do. When it came to Cersei's death, once again Heidi felt that she gave up without much resistance. She claimed that she wished that Cersei had had a big fight or a final stand against someone, basically that her death was of more consequence to herself and others, but alas. 5. Barbie Ferreira reportedly walked out over Kat's story. Euphoria. Barbie Ferreira managed in the first season of Euphoria to gain quite a fan base, acting as a fiercely independent role model who overcame the trope of the fat friend to be entirely her own person. Fans loved seeing what she was doing and where she was going, and Ferreira herself seemed happy too. But then roll on season 2 and some issues started to arise. The juicy bit of mystery in this entry is that we don't actually know exactly what detail of what storyline caused such an outcry from Barbie. An anonymous tip alleges that one day she got into such a huge argument with director Sam Levinson that she packed up and stormed off set. Apparently it was all to do with how dark the season was going, and in particular how her character Kat was being taken in a dark new direction that she did not vibe with. Maybe we'll find out the details later, but for now, yikes. 4. Matt LeBlanc hated the Rachel romance. Friends. Of all its infamous storylines, one of the most objectionable Friends endeavours was of course the Rachel-Joey romance plot. From the very moment it was proposed, the entire cast begged for it to be thrown out. It was weird, they argued. Rachel and Joey are more like siblings. It would be like hooking up with a brother or a cousin. And if we're talking about that, we all know that hooking up with a cousin is more of a Ross thing. Joey actor Matt LeBlanc hated this idea even more than the rest, saying that right from the start he felt kind of icky about it, calling the relationship, quote, wildly inappropriate. He said that it simply didn't make sense for his character. Not only was he a serial womanizer and this was more of a lovey-dovey thing, but LeBlanc insisted that Joey would never be a bad enough friend to take someone else's girlfriend, never mind one of his best mate's one true loves. The storyline was given the go-ahead anyway, despite complaints from the whole cast, with the studio citing the need to keep things new and exciting, but it's at least good to know that it made no sense to anyone really, and to this day is hated by cast and fans alike. 3. Evangeline Lilly thought Kate sucked. Lost. It's one thing for an actor to say that they really hated specific storylines throughout their characters' arcs, but it's another thing entirely for them to admit that overall they just thought their character sucked. Evangeline Lilly falls into the latter category. For 6 years, Lilly played romance-riddled Kate Austen, and it was precisely these romances that she despised. Speaking on the Lost Boys podcast, she admitted that as time went on, she became increasingly frustrated with her loss of autonomy, and that this frustration was compounded even further by how obnoxious she found her character. She felt that Kate was robbed of all of her depth, only existing as an instrument for creating drama revolving around the Jack Sawyer love triangle. She said her character was made immature and whiny when convenient, and that this took away any power from her thoughts and decisions. Trying to make the best of the situation, Lilly recalled that she always tried to bring strength and independence to the role when she could. She wanted Kate to be better, stronger, and symbolize something more in line with her values. But unfortunately, you can only do so much with what you're given. In the years since Lost, her stories about her treatment on set have also revealed just how much she was up against it. 2. David Tennant hated the idea of a crossover Christmas. Doctor Who. Now this one is a fun one because sometimes there are storylines that actors hate so much they actually prevent them from ever being made. And one thing we can thank David Tennant for is for us receiving the next Doctor as we know it, because without his intervention we would have had something absolutely terrible. Believe it or not, the plan at one point was to have J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter come to life because of some sort of space bug. In the episode, the Doctor Who cast would be pitted against witches and wizards, and it would all revolve around a cameo from Rowling herself. The episode was written, Rowling interviews were planned, and then suddenly it all fizzled out to nothing. But why is that, you ask? Well, it's because Tennant put his foot down. Tennant is said to have hated the idea, thinking it sounded like a cheap gimmick rather than a genuine episode. Luckily for him, he was in a powerful enough position that his dislike for the idea was enough to have it changed. And because he didn't want it to happen and didn't want to act in it, the showrunners decided that really they had to prioritize keeping him happy and threw out the idea altogether. And number 1. Laurie Holden hated how they did Andrea. The Walking Dead. At the beginning, Laurie Holden really thought she had it all made. She signed a deal to do 8 years of The Walking Dead, believing that she would grow to be one of the strongest survivors and bring in the new post-apocalypse world, one of the fan favourites, one of the real long stayers. It's true that in the comics, she lasts longer than she did in the TV show, and that she's far more likeable whilst doing so. Based off this information and the things that she'd been told, Holden had started the process of buying a house nearby to filming locations, planning her future and her career around the show. Well, sadly for her, they didn't intend to stick to their promise or the comic storylines, instead taking Andrea down a road to becoming one of the most hated characters of the early seasons, if not the whole show. She gets into a relationship with the evil governor, betrays her friends, becomes insanely annoying, and then dies an underwhelming death. She claimed that her death wasn't too bad and she didn't hate it that much in the scale of things, but if she was honest, I bet she'd have a few gripes. She thought her arc would see her overcoming the grief of her sister's death to eventually couple up with Rick and deliver communities from evil riding atop a horse. It's no wonder she grew to dislike the story so much, given that it's so far from the one she was promised. My god, I'd be mad too if I was told I would be a long-staying heroine and I turned out to be the absolute worst person that's ever existed. And on that note, we've reached the end of this list of 10 TV actors who hated their storylines. If you have any more particularly juicy entries you would have included on this list, then let us know in the comments down below. I thrive off the gossip. With that in mind, remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.